Hi guys, so today I'm going to be talking about a couple different types of transport, right? So I'm going to talk about active transport, I'm going to talk about secondary active transport, cotransport, what anti-transport is. I'm going to clear all these things up. So it all starts with our sodium-potassium pump, right? So it's going to be pumping 3 sodium out and 2 potassium in. And this is an example of active transport. This is active transport because we're using ATP. So we're breaking ATP into ADP plus its inorganic phosphate in return for its energy. And that energy that we get is going to be used to transport that sodium out and get that potassium in. So this is active transport, but it's also an example of counter transport. So we're counter-transporting 2 molecules actively. So, counter. Now, what this is going to do is this is going to create a gradient. It's going to create a gradient of a higher concentration of sodium outside the cell and a greater concentration of potassium inside the cell. So, this is going to mean that sodium is going to want to get back in. And we're going to let it back in. And the reason we're going to let it back in is so that we can get another kind of molecule in, right? So this is going to be our cotransport. Cotransport over here. So in cotransporting it, we're going to, in this example, we're taking a glucose with the sodium and bringing it into the cell. And the way we're going to do that is because sodium wants to go down its concentration gradient. It wants to get back into the cell because there's a lower concentration right there, right? It wants to diffuse in. So in diffusing in, it's going to say, hey, glucose, I want to take you too. And the glucose is like, no man, but it's going to take it, you know? It's going to overpower the glucose. So the glucose is going to get pulled into the cell through this protein, along with the sodium. And it's going to enter the cell, even though glucose is going up its concentration gradient, meaning that there's a higher concentration of glucose inside the cell. So what this is an example of is cotransport, but it's also an example of secondary active transport. So, what do I mean by secondary active transport? What I mean is that we're using a concentration gradient that was created using ATP to bring another molecule in. So, we're using the sodium, in this example, that we pumped out, and we're letting it come back down its concentration gradient, but we're making it take another molecule with it. So this is what we would call secondary active transport. I hope this was helpful and it cleared some stuff up for you guys.